All right. Hi, team. Today is a Wednesday, September 11th. It is our weekly team meeting, and today we're going to be talking about Remine. So Remine is a big data and analytics software that we have in our core tools within the MLS. So when you log into your MLS, you open up to your Clarity dashboard here, and that's what we see all the different suites of software that we can use in our business. This newest one, Remine, was just added in the spring of 2019, and it is quickly becoming one of the most useful tools, software tools that you can have in your business. So what exactly does it mean, big data and analytics? How does that really help us as individual real estate agents? Well, the idea is that now that a lot of information is online, and now that a lot of information is trackable, there is just simply a lot of data out there to analyze properties and trends and things like that. We can use some of that leverage, some of that knowledge to really target some specific contacts. So some examples that we're going to go over today include things like which particular neighborhoods to target, which particular homeowners have a high likelihood of selling their property, what are some potential rental properties that you can target for particular landlords and investors. Essentially, if you're looking to target a specific type of real estate client, Remine gives the ability to narrowly focus on which one that you want to do. And so really the most challenging part about using Remine is asking it the right questions. The Remine has all the answers. We just need to understand which questions to ask in order to get the data that we want. And so hopefully going over a few examples would really help us kind of narrow down what we can really utilize with Remine and how that data might be useful for us. So the first example that we're going to go over today is essentially a general farming campaign. And so what we want to do today is understand, okay, if we had the ability to farm a particular area, what area should that be? And by farm, I mean that we are specifically going to have an advertising campaign where we, as a real estate agent, we are looking to attract homeowners in that particular community that are looking to sell their property. You can have different forms of farming campaigns. You could be targeting a specific community and you're looking for renters that are looking to be buyers, or you're targeting a specific community and looking for buyers. But in this particular instance, we're looking for sellers in a particular community, and we're going to do that by farming a specific area. And with that, really the whole world of possibilities in the Tampa Bay real estate market are open to us. How do we know which particular neighborhood to farm? And that's where Remine and the MLS can really help us figure that out. So we'll start, usually with a lot of real estate agents, when they choose to farm an area, they choose to farm an area that they know. Either they're very familiar with it, they live in that particular neighborhood, but it's usually a good idea to at least start with communities that you're very familiar with. So from that perspective, we'll identify some communities here in the Brandon area, just to utilize some examples of how this could potentially work for us. And so what we want to say is, okay, let's say we live here in the Brentwood Hills community. And so I choose to say, okay, Brentwood Hills is the neighborhood in Brandon that I'm going to specifically choose to target to farm. And now with that, we want to know some information about that community. We want to know, one, how many homes are in that community? How expensive is that community? What's the turnover rate of that community? If there are 1,000 homes in that community and the average price point of each home is $200,000, and only 3 out of 1,000 homes turn over every year, that is, the sellers sell their home in that particular community, we know that's not a great neighborhood to target to specifically focus. But let's say Brentwood Hills had 1,000 homes and the average price point was $500,000, and 200 of those homes turned over every single year. Well, 20% turnover rate at a $500,000 price point, that's pretty good. Typically, we want to target a neighborhood that has about a 6, 7, 8% turnover rate on an annual basis. And really, to do that, what we need to find out is how many total properties there are in that particular neighborhood, and then how many particular properties in that neighborhood sell. So for our example, we're going to search Brentwood Hills. So that's the name of the particular subdivision. And what we want to find out is a couple things. One, we want to find out in the last 365 days, how many properties have sold. So we know that 44 properties in Brentwood Hills have sold in the last 365 days. And then if we look up how many properties there are in Brentwood Hills, and we can do that by specifically looking up and that information in IMAP. So the softwares that we're going to be using today are Matrix, which is our MLS software, Remine, and then IMAP. IMAP is a public records and tax data software. It's going to help us get some basic information that we're looking for. So specifically in Brentwood Hills, in this one section of Brentwood Hills, there are 212 homes. And so if we want to specifically target, Brentwood Hills Phase 1, how many of these properties tracked a Phase 1? So that's what we're looking for. So in the last 365 days in Phase 1 of Brentwood Hills, Phase A, Unit 1 of Brentwood Hills, there are 212 properties. Of those 212, in the last year, 2 of them have sold. So we know, okay, there's not a lot of turnover in that particular community. If we wanted to find a different one, let's say we're looking for Brentwood Hills. Let's find the most common one. Brentwood Hills track A, Unit 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Unit B. Yeah, we can get a good understanding. Okay, even of all the different tracks in Brentwood Hills, 212. So there are 1,066 homes in all of the different Brentwood Hills tracks. We know that 44 of them sell. So on an annual basis, if we take the percentage of that, we're getting about 4%. So for us, understanding that we wanted it somewhere around 6% to 8% turnover rate, we know that we're not going to get a whole lot in that particular community. So you know what? We're going to move on to maybe another community that we know well. And so maybe taking a look nearby, we can understand, okay, what's another community that has a lot of properties for sale? Maybe Lumsden Point. That's a good one that we might want to take a look at. So in this particular example, in the Lumsden Point subdivision, there are 237 residential properties. Of those 237 residential properties, 16 of them sold in the last year. So doing some quick math, 16 divided by 237. Our turnover rate is 6.7%, almost 6.8%. And so now we're getting to the neighborhood of, okay, this seems to be a good neighborhood. Lumsden Point, there's a lot of homes that turn over every single year. If we take a look at our some stats on that, we're getting an average price of about $300,000. So we know, average price point in Tampa Bay is about $250,000. We know that this particular community has a higher turnover rate and it has a higher price point than the average. So again, just by taking a look at this, doing some quick math, understanding, okay, there are 2 subdivisions that are right next to each other, literally right across the street. Which one should I target? Well, understanding those basic numbers, we can say, okay, between Lumsden Point and Brentwood Hills, Lumsden Point has a higher price, a higher average selling price, and has a higher turnover rate. Therefore, dollar for dollar, bang for buck for how much money you're spending on your advertising, how much time you're spending on your advertising, Lumsden Point is the better neighborhood to focus on. So that's part 1 of the equation. We haven't even got to Remine yet, understanding how to use that software. But essentially what we're looking to do is, which neighborhoods do we target? Now that we have a good understanding of which neighborhoods to target, now we can really start to utilize that Remine data pretty effectively. So now what we're going to do, so when you click on open up your Clarity dashboard here in your MLS and click on Remine, you're going to open up to the software, and you're going to see a couple different tabs here on the left-hand side, a couple different tabs down here on the bottom. What we're specifically looking for is this Discover tab. So click on that, and that's going to take you to the map view here. And so what we see here when we have this map view essentially is all the properties, all the residential properties, and pretty much all the properties in general that are defined. You'll notice a blue dot next to them. And then when we see that blue dot, we can start to analyze that particular property by pulling up their particular card here. So what we're going to be looking for is we're going to specifically try and find Lumsden Point and Brentwood Hills here. So again, here's that same subdivision, that same community here. Brentwood Hills here, Lumsden Point just south of that. And we know we want to target specifically Lumsden Point. And again, our goal with Remine here, we're creating a farming campaign. We want to target a specific community that we can specifically send some information to potential sellers in that particular community. And we want to try and find which properties we should specifically target. So with that information, we know that Lumsden Point, again, had about 237 properties. And so there are several different ways that we can go about targeting these homes. With 237 homes in a community, we could simply send out a flyer to all 237 of them. Now, again, there's not much uniqueness about that. You're essentially copy pasting one template of a flyer and mailing it to all 237 people. Doesn't matter if those people are renters, if they just bought their home last year, if they bought their home 20 years ago, they're still getting the same flyer, the same information. And for most people, they might take a look at a flyer, but they're more than likely just going to chuck it in the trash. What we need to figure out is, okay, how can we specifically tailor the message that we're delivering to certain people? And so really what we want to do is we're going to highlight this particular community here. So we know that, here we go. Going to draw a map. So right now, we have a highlighted map of Lumsden Point here. And what it's showing me that I'm specifically looking for off-market properties in Lumsden Point. So again, there was about 237 properties in there. We're pulling up about 204 off-market properties. Now again, so now we're essentially trying to figure out a specific target niche within this community that we can target. And really what we're looking for are, who are the homeowners in this community that have a likelihood of selling? Because again, if we're going to be a listing agent for this particular community, we want to find homes that have a high likelihood of selling pretty soon. And so with that information, we know some things about homeowners. We know that the average homeowner moves about every 7 to 9 years or so. And so what we can start to do is have some filters on this particular property to know certain interests. So if we want to find, let's say we want to find homeowners that have a minimum 5 years in their home. So somewhere between 5 and 14 years, people have lived in their home. So in this particular polygon, I'm looking for a homeowner that's lived in their home at least 5 years. And so now we can go from, 203 results to 148 results. So again, we're still looking just at Lumsden Point, just the homes in this particular community, and narrowing it down further and further and further. And so now instead of sending one postcard to all 237 of them, we're sending now a very specific postcard for sellers, for people in this community that have lived in their home for at least 5 years. But we can get even more tailored than that. We can start to say, just because you lived in your home 5 years doesn't necessarily mean you have some equity in your home. So maybe we want to target people that have at least $40,000 equity in their home. And we'll say, maximum $400,000 equity in their home. So let's say we're looking for people between $40,000 and $250,000 equity in their home. So good news, most of the people that we targeted, so we start with 148. Most of the people, if you've been living in this community for 5 years, you have at least $40,000 in home equity. So maybe we want to make that even higher. Let's say we want to target people with $75,000 in home equity. And we'll go up to 400,000. So let's see if we can't narrow that number down even further. So let's say anywhere between $75,000 and $270,000 in home equity here in this particular community. There we go. Okay, so now we've reduced it from 144 to now 76. And so now we have here, we're starting to get a much better sense of who are some really good potential people that could sell their home in this community. And so now, if we want to send a postcard to particular sellers and say something to the effect of, hello sellers, did you know that you've been living in your home for at least 5 years and you have this much equity based on this information? If we were to put your home on the market today, you could net, approximately this. Obviously, we can tweak the language of that postcard, but that's essentially what we're looking for. We can get even more specific with some of the data that we're looking for. So let's say we're specifically looking for the people that own their property in this particular community. So now we've gone from 76 to 65. So again, the other properties that we were targeting actually had renters in there. So if we wanted to send a postcard to the actual address, it wasn't going to be worth it because those were rentals in that particular area. And let's say we can get even more specific. So now Remine has what's called their sell score. That essentially is their internal algorithms that say, okay, these people either have a low, medium, or high likelihood of selling their home in the next year. So again, we went from 65 to 1. So now if we wanted to specifically target one particular property, we know that this is the perfect property to target according to Remine. So they've been in their home at least 5 years. They have at least $40,000 in their equity. And based on several other factors, they have a very high likelihood of selling their home in the next year. So you can bet if I wanted to target Lumsden Point, I'm going to go knock on this door tomorrow and talk to this particular homeowner and talk to them about their property. And what's great, if I open up a card here in Remine, so let's open up a specific property card, I can find out a little bit more information about that property, a little bit more information about that owner as well. So now what we find here, we know who the owner is. We have that information here. We have some information about their property as well, how much Remine estimates the value of the property to be, how much equity Remine estimates they have. There's also several other pieces of information about this particular property. We can get a valuation. We can get a couple different sources of valuation here on what the market thinks this property is worth. And so now we have a pretty good understanding of the property. We can even get a little bit better understanding of what the market looks like, what the neighborhood looks like, a little bit of information about the particular property, and then particular people associated with this property. We even have information, their phone numbers, this person again on the do not call list. But again, we have information about these particular people. And so again, if we wanted to target a particular property, this one would be a really good one to do that. Now let's say we want both medium and high likelihood of selling. So now we have these 4 properties now have a good likelihood of selling their home in this particular community. Again, they've been living there at least 5 years, have at least $40,000 in equity, they're primary residents in that particular home. I'm certainly going to be able to target these particular people. Now what we can do here is we're going to go over to our card dashboard here, and we're going to select them all, and then we're going to track these selected properties. And so what specifically are we going to do with that? So if we track them here, where we can add a specific tracking sort. So let's say I want to track them all. I'm going to track a particular label. So we'll call this Lumsden Point. I've added the Lumsden Point label here. Great, and so now I'm tracking these 4 properties in a particular label. And again, so if you go over here on the left-hand dashboard here, you have where we are here in the Discover page. And now I want to open up the Track dashboard here. And so now I can start to manage some of the particular properties that I'm starting to track here. And you can see I'm tracking a lot of potential properties here. But what I want to do is essentially sort out some particular properties. So if I want to manage some labels here, I'll only want to track here. There we go. Okay, so now I have these 4 properties that I'm tracking. Now with this information, what I want to do, if I select them all, I can export all the data with this information, get a Excel spreadsheet, and then use that information how I want to, pulling all these different factors in here from the status of the property, last known price, ownership time, all of these different factors. I can pull that information in a spreadsheet. Or I can send a specific postcard campaign. So let's say if I want to call this Lumsden Point Farm. Remine automatically is going to take me to a third-party website that's going to take my 4 properties that I want to track and then create a specific postcard campaign for those particular homes in that particular community. And again, it shows me exactly what my price is if I wanted to choose a design and really go from there. It handles the software all directly. So again, if I just wanted to do it just sold, general farming, they have specific postcards that now if I wanted to mail out a specific postcard to some specific communities and specific homes, we can do that exactly with this flyer right here. And so again, it makes it very easy. Now, instead of sending one generic postcard to all 237 homes, which again, that might cost me $300-400, I can now, farm 4 particular properties. And for the same amount of money that I was going to spend, let's say $400, now I can spend, $400 on just 4 properties. You can bet that they're probably going to get more than one postcard over the course of the next couple weeks and couple months. So that's generally how the idea of a listing campaign for farming for a particular community would work with Remine. So from there, we can track a couple other things with that information. So let's say we aren't looking for people to sell their home. What we are instead looking for is we're going to track a particular community, but we want to track maybe renters. We want to track renters in this community, and we want to track them in order to help them buy a home. And so what we can do is, again, we can do some math here to say, okay, what we're going to do is going back to the MLS, we want to figure out, okay, what does an average home in Lumsden Point, what does that rent for? Because if we have that information, we can get a good understanding of, okay, if they're paying this much in rent, this is about how much home they could afford to buy when it comes to a mortgage payment. So we'll look here in Lumsden Point, the past year or so, have we had any properties that have rented in Lumsden Point? Yep. So again, this is very basic. So we're looking at about $1,700 a month for a rental property in this particular community. Translate that to a mortgage payment, you're looking again anywhere between a $300,000 and $400,000 home. And so again, what we can say is now targeting particular community, this same community. Now what we're looking for are absentee owners. So we are looking for, in Lumsden Point, we know that there are 237 properties. So again, we pulled that information from IMAP. We know there are 237 residential properties in that community. Of those 237, 34 of those properties have a mailing address for the owner that is different than the actual mailing address of the property. Now, that doesn't always mean that that property is being rented out, but there's a very high likelihood that that property is in fact being rented today. If the owner's mailing address is not the same as the owner's actual physical address of the property, there's a good chance that that particular community has renters in it. And again, if we were going to specifically target renters in this community in order to be able to buy a home, now we know, okay, instead of sending out a postcard to all 237 properties, we can just send out a postcard to 34 properties, specifically looking to target renters. So again, we are selecting all 34 of these properties. We're going to create a label that says Lumsden Point Renters. I'm going to apply that label. And now all 34 of these properties are on a particular label. So if I wanted to go over to track my labels, I'm looking for Lumsden Point Renters. And so again, now what I'm going to do is I'm going to select all of these properties, and I want to send a postcard to, let's say, LP Renters. Great. And again, now for $22, I can specifically target all renters in that community and send them a specific rental postcard. Again, we can do one. We can have a specific design that we choose with Remine, or what we can do if we wanted to choose to export that data into a spreadsheet and use different software for different design, or if we want to send them a letter or a different piece of information to mail them out, we can easily do that as well. But again, it's understanding what are the questions that we need to ask Remine in order to get the answers that we want. So we've seen a little bit on how to target a particular community if you're looking just for rentals, if you're looking for sellers, and if you're looking for buyers. Let's say you're looking for properties to manage. Well, again, that same way that we're targeting these people that are currently renting their property, pulling some of the data would tell us not only where are their the actual physical address, but what is the mailing address of the particular owner as well. And so we can use a lot of that information to now create a really good campaign of who we should target. And so that's pretty a good, rough overview of how to use Remine. There's some other great tools that we can use with it as well. So now that we have, let's say, tracked certain properties. So let's say we want to track all of the homes in Lumsden Point. With the high to medium likelihood of selling. And what we can even do is we can go back and add a low to that as well. But now what that's going to do is that's going to send us an alert. So if we wanted to set up specific alerts about a property that is changing. So let's say of these 4 homes that are in that tracking for us, if the status of that property was to change for whatever reason, we would get an alert of that notification. And so that's something that's going to be pretty helpful for us. So now what we can do, let's clear everything out. And so if we, instead of just wanted to focus on Lumsden Point, now let's say in the Brandon area in general, let's say we wanted to specifically target the properties that have just according to Remine, a high likelihood of selling their property. And so now what we're going to be doing is we're going to be neighborhood agnostic. We're not necessarily going to be focusing on a particular neighborhood. We're just looking to see, okay, of all of the property that Remine has, what does Remine think is going to be a good potential for people to sell? And so let's say we can get pretty broad with it. Let's say we wanted to focus on Lutz. So we're going to look up all of the particular property in Lutz. And so it's going to give us a map here. So now it's going to say, okay, we want, let's say, a property value. At least we want a $300,000 selling price, and we'll go up to an $800,000 selling price. So anywhere between $300,000 and $800,000. And we want people to have at least $100,000 in equity in the property. Again, if we want people to be in there a minimum of 7 years. And a high likelihood to sell, where are the communities in Lutz that have those high likelihoods to sell? And again, what we do, we have a lot of information here. We got to zoom in into a particular neighborhood to really get a sense of, okay, where are those particular communities? So once you can start to see the lines, once you can start to see the individual property, that's when we can start to really get to see some of what our criteria is. And so again, it could be that, again, what's the question that we're asking? Well, we're asking, are there neighborhoods in Lutz with at least $300,000 minimum property value with a high likelihood to sell? And you know what? This neighborhood doesn't appear to have any of that information here. So, which again is also good information for us to know. So maybe we need to tweak some of the things that we're searching for. Maybe we need to find out, okay, is there other search criteria that we could search for? Maybe instead of a particular neighborhood, we're a particular street. Maybe the price point is too high that we're looking for. Maybe the equity level is too high that we're looking for. And so there are certain things, maybe the sell score is too high. That's what we're looking for. Let's say if we have any properties in this particular area, any property value. No. No, again, nothing's coming up. So also very good information to know that, sometimes it gives us the information we want, and sometimes there just is information, the answer that we're looking for doesn't exist. And so the question that we ask doesn't have a good answer to it. But again, that's sometimes just as useful to know and without actually getting an answer. So with that, let's check out the chat. If anybody has any questions, you're more than welcome to open it up in the chat. But if not, or text me if you have any questions there. But if not, so again, this video is being recorded. So we'll have the video in our library. We'll have the audio in the podcast library as well. So if you have any questions about Remine, or you want to set up a specific mentorship session on how to use it, we can certainly set that up for you. And again, understand what are the right questions that we want to ask, what are the particular communities that we want to target, who are the particular clients that we want to have. Once we can answer those questions, we can specifically find out the answers that we're looking for. So with that, everybody, thank you very much for watching. Everybody in person, thanks for coming by, and have a great rest of your evening. Thanks, everybody.